Giriraj Amarnath is a principal research, disaster risk management and climate resilience and research group leader, water risk to development and resilience of the International Water Management Institute. His role focuses on climate risk assessment, monitoring and early warning tool using Earth observation data and modeling tools, and the development of disaster risk insurance solutions. Dr. Giriraj began his career as a remote sensing expert at the University of Bayreuth, Germany, and was a disaster risk specialist for the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development at Kathmandu. He led two flagship programs that recently won the World Geospatial Excellence Award and the 2020 GEO SDG Awards in promotion innovative index-based flood insurance. Dr. Giriraj holds a PhD in Applied Remote Sensing from the National Remote Sensing Center, India, and MSc in Geonetics and Botany from the University of Madras.
So thanks, first of all, for organizing this webinar, the recorded webinar session. And also, it's a very important webinar when it comes to water for public health. And I have been asked to brief on preparing communities for natural disasters. So we thank NIH and the partners for organizing this event. And it has been a long association of collaborating with NIH team. So today I will be speaking on the topic of preparing communities for natural disasters. I hope this will be useful to the participants who will be attending this session. So prior moving forward to this session, I would like to keep four things clear for the participant here. One is we are talking about public health, mostly related to natural disaster. Flood is an important climate shock globally, and we see about just about riverine flooding, about 21 million people are exposed to flooding invariably in large floodplains, and an estimated of over 100 billion US dollar in terms of the gross domestic product for each year. This is a report from WRI. We also see future projections from IPCC and the various international organizations that the flood frequency in a large part of the developing countries shown higher scenarios when it comes to climate change. It means that both the frequency and intensity of flooding is going to be increased. And it also calls for systemic climate resilience approach need to be developed. It's not about quantifying the climate change. Then you need to prepare response strategies, whether it is through monitoring system, whether it's through policies and governance. So those are the areas we need to focus. The aim of doing such approach should be a cascading approach. It's not just about doing the things on a silo. We often see that when it comes to disaster, there are various public sectors are there, but again, the informations are not coordinated when it comes to resilience building measures on the vulnerable communities. That's the focus of my topic today. And if you look at the particular map, we are talking about close to 15 countries are under exposed to flood risk. As I am speaking from Sri Lanka, the South Asia is invariably affected by not just about climate change, but the kind of natural disasters we are talking about. It's extremely high. We are talking about 4.84 million people are exposed to flood each year. And even a small country like Bangladesh, again, you see close to 4.84 because they are on the receiving downstream communities from Nepal to on the north from Northeast India, from China, and also from the downstream impact they are exposed to that. So that's a kind of a brief summary we are looking at. So what are our preparedness strategies to those communities who will be affected by, not by flood, but also by drought and other geomorphological disasters, which we will go through later in the call today. So what I thought is to give a broader snapshot of what the crisis we are talking about. Particularly, this is more relevant to communities living in those fragile systems. So we are talking about close to 844 million people are lack to drinking water access. And it means that 1 in every 10 people in the planet is running through these bigger challenges of access to quality water and drinking water access. So it always brings the challenges of when too much and too little water. One side we see the access problem, in other side we see the excess water. That's where the flooding comes into the picture, where the crop damages to those vulnerable population will also be challenging for risk management to those societies. So this is another deep dive into the water crisis report, where we are seeing globally countries have been labeled in terms of the extreme high risk. So countries like India are on the position table at 13, and we look at a large part of the Middle East are under the extreme water stress country, being a hyper arid region. The societies or the communities living in those are either for agriculture practices or urban societies who are looking for domestic water use are invariably affected by that, not just because of surface water, but as well as the groundwater depletion as well. So this is a research that calls really for an policy decisions, promoting inclusive research and providing broader investments when it comes to sustainable climate finance. So I think these kind of broader outlooks are really important to look at globally, because you can't take problems within yourself. We have to look at across the problems, whether it's a transboundary basin, whether it is a regional mechanism. So we need to look at water crisis more at a, not at least at a scale what we are looking at, more beyond your input. Because often when you look at regions in India even, where we might see many of the communities might be receiving the water from upstream communities. So if the upstream snow melt or any other form of crisis that happens in the upstream, the downstream societies will also be impacted. So we need to look at more inclusiveness here rather than referring to your own region of interest. Now, the other set of topic could be is also we talk about inclusion. Here is an example from UN report that speaks about women and girls spent about 200 million hours howling for water every day. It's a global statistics, and of course there will be some changes to this figure, but invariably we have these kind of imbalance when it comes to equity. So water access to those vulnerable societies, including the disadvantages group and also the marginalized communities will are exposed to these kind of challenges. So that's an alarming figures what was presented here. And again, we also need to look at, as I said, regional water balance is really important. So this is again, one is access, then also the issues of about people traveling to get the water. So 6 kilometer every day to haul 40 pounds of water. This is again a global figure. And again, I would not say this is still a continuing picture. I think a lot of countries have been playing a big role on sustainable, under the Sustainable Water Development Program. We see that there is access to groundwater, providing water through canal structure, providing through number of mechanisms in which over years we will see this kind of issue should be addressed much better by the policymaker. But on the other hand, climate change is also invariably going to affect those access to water again. So we need to look at balancing act here. How do we bring better eco restoration or the landscape approach so that the watershed in which we are all looking at access to water is collectively available. Now, this is a classic picture of, again, this picture is improving, but still we see in many large part of the Indian cities, more than at least the global statistics points about 50% of the Indian population or global population have access to safe drinking water, right? This is again a statistics for India, where about 200,000 people die every year for lack of safe drinking water, right? So you can see here how this, I mean, more of a painful picture, I would call, how people are looking for water. Even there are cities we talk about, waters are not available on a daily basis. They might need to collect once in 3 days. Now we are looking at 21st century, and then if we are talking about in the next 30 years with projections to climate change, we need to really look at innovative solutions to manage some of those crises here we are talking about, right? And the other problem is, as I said, that future risk is quite challenging for us. Like at least 1 in 4 people likely live in a country affected by chronic recurring or water shortages again, right? So it means that what we are seeing today's trend is going to continue more invariably at different location, at different, it could be a severe or it could be in different form of that risk. So this is very challenging for us to look at in the years to come. But these kind of a future risk is very important for societies to plan, not just from the government perspective, but also the inclusive role. Inclusive should not be just the role of government, it should be the public sector, it could be the communities, it could be the NGOs, it could be the civil societies, all have to collectively play in a decision making process to look at challenges what our communities are undergoing today. Now, I would also like to end up with slide while we are looking at too much less water or the quality of water. Here we are talking about the excess water through the natural disasters. So statistics like 2016 in India alone, 100 million people were exposed to flood, right? Maybe the same location might be a drought or a wet water scarcity area. But now we see those locations like states like Tamil Nadu never experienced a massive scale of flooding that has happened in 2016. So it's not, so we have to prepare not just for too much water, but also too little water or too less water, right? So this is one important challenges. These are all related to the communities what I am addressing here. It may not be direct impact for urban societies, but increasingly these issues are getting spiraled in both the urban and the rural societies. Now, what we are going to collectively present here is, yes, we can look at a lot of problems, but let us also look at some solutions here. So this is a IMI framework where we look at not from the technology as such as a front-end picture, but also look at how technologies can support in the development goals. So one is we are calling 3R. There could be multiple R we could look after. One is risk identification, second is risk reduction, and also the third element is the risk transfer. So number of elements are there, but what it in simple term is we are understanding the risk, whether it is a water challenges through excess or deficit, whether identifying the population where it is exposed to risk, and then calling upon plans that would help us to reduce the risk. And then despite doing that, there will be still some risk remains in the society because you don't know how the variability of a given climate will emerge through the El Nino or the La Nino impact. So risk transfer is again an important area so that you manage those risks and leave those risks with someone, not keeping that risk with us. So while we do this one, I think it's not just we can do it on a global scale because the scale of problems could be at a farm level or it could be at a national level depending on the user. So we also need to look at capacities, look at, as I said, the gender, youth and inclusiveness. Then we can talk about the comprehensive nature of disaster risk management. And by doing that, we will be generating not just the digital product, but also useful knowledge coming from the community level and advising them on a timely so that these risks can be managed in the future years to come. Now, we are not, as I said in my beginning, we are not looking problems at local. We need to look at from across bottom-up approach or top-down approach. So regional approaches are also mandated from our organization. We look at prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery. Across all these areas, the communities are going to be addressed very collectively in this process. We will see some of the examples as we move on. Now, as a starting point, I would just say, where do you look at the problems? Where the risk is happening, where the hazard is expected to happen. So you need to monitor, you need to map, you need to quantify. So IMI has done a first search assessment for entire South Asia with the support coming from World Bank, ADB and others. So to prepare a comprehensive climate hazard information. So we were able to quantify that on nature of all the disasters, whether it is drought, flood, extreme heat, or the climate change, what are the areas that are future expected to target those vulnerable societies. And then at the end of the day, the outcomes are mainly to look at how do you improve poverty levels, how do you come up with better food security strategies for those societies which are regularly going to be affected by those climate shocks. So these kind of informations are relevant for policymakers as well as to the development partners who would invest in climate investment for a sustainable development. Now, it's not possible to just talk about today. We also need to look at future. So this is a product from World Resource Institute where they produced risk information for both floods and drought. Invariably, if you look at the drought, entire semi-arid and large part of the southern India and the western India are going to be under extremely high drought risk. And if you look at the floods, majority of the Ganges basin, part of the coastal inundation, the flood is not just from the monsoon, but also through the coastal inundation, cyclones, and other form of disasters through which coastal areas are also invariably going to be affected. So when you combine this with the current risk and the future, you would able to know what should be our strategy for the next 20 to 30 years. So that's a kind of a research we are doing it to identify hotspots for investment plans. Now, while we do that, we also need to look at linking that with the not just about farmers or the people, but also their food security. So here is a study we have looked at, looking at all the risk available from global data. We combine that with the production information and identify areas that is going to be under extremely high water stress, not just today, but also for the future. So look at this map. We are talking about country like India. Most of the rice that is produced in those regions where the poor and vulnerable and the rural sector largely depending on agriculture in country like India or Bangladesh, Pakistan, large part of the developing country. For example, here in India, we are talking farmers grow most of their crop in the extremely high risk categories, right? It means that in any form of climate change in future, there should be a innovative strategy to look at depletion of groundwater or areas where it's not about only groundwater. The problems could also be that excess water through flooding, like large part of the eastern region, like the last year in 2020 in India, where the early monsoon came, farmers were their crops got wiped out, and then they planted again. Then there was a second cycle of flooding. Then they lost again the crop. So it means that farmers' resilience to those climate shocks are also very critical here. Not just looking at the climate shock, but also looking at their production risk as well. So that's a kind of a study we have done here. I do have posted the link here for you to read more on this particular research. Now let's deep dive more into, because this particular webinar is about preparing for vulnerable communities. What are our strategies? I think across all this recent years have emerged, the prerequisite for any disaster preparedness is monitoring and early warning, right? So why it is so important, monitoring and early warning? I just want to take back a century back old picture here. You can take this particular picture that was presented in 1847. I believe it should be a painting done by Leander Roos in 1847, where this particular society is looking at ways to look at the flood alerts. There was no flood alerts during those days, and where the society is completely surrounded by flood waters, right? So this was happened in 1847, and then, as I said, that there was no flood alert in those days, and there was people are trying to rescue those societies who are flooded, because these people need to be evacuated who are in the building, high-rise building, what you are seeing here. Now, following that mechanism, in 1849, the first telegram was installed in Danube River. Danube is part of the European transboundary river basin, coming from Austria to Vienna. And then this was the first telegram that was used to send a flood alert, saying that after 2 years of their challenges that come across without warning, in those days in 1849, there was a telegram was used. We use a lot of post office. Nowadays, post office is slowly disappearing in many part of the countries, but these were the mechanism they were installed during those days to send timely alerts through a radio frequency or any form of those technology. So why I'm saying this one, you can see the problems is not today. It is going back 200 years old. Back we see the problems are spiraling, but the scale of disasters now we see is quite increasing. That brings into credible technologies to be delivered, not only technology, but also the planning process. Now from there, if you look at where do we transit? So let's take 1960s, where we are talking about those days people used to bring cartography, prepare the maps, looking at where are the hazard has happened. And there used to be a lot of planning done on that. There was a lot of actors come. We don't see now only after the tsunami in 2004, we had a lot of countries develop the Disaster Management Act through a government process. So it took so much of ages to talk about even Disaster Management Act that looks at across the communities, not just the vulnerable, but also any societies living in those regions. And then from there, you see now in early 2000 with the growing field of space technology, computer models, we see now countries are preparing the digitally flood models, cyclone models, hurricane models. And now you can say if there is a written period of a cyclone comes or a flood event happens, you know which societies will be likely impacted or which infrastructure might likely get damaged. So once that information is available, you could then establish certain weather stations in those locations. You could establish certain flood shelters. You could establish more knowledge information that can help the societies to manage those climate shocks. So you can see a transition from paper map to digital technology. That's what I want to highlight here. Technologies are playing a big role in the years to come, particularly in times of pandemic. We see now how digital solutions are helping not only the government, but also the societies, whether to vaccination program, whether it is alerting the likely diseases or outbreaking in a given location. So this is the kind of evolution I would like to highlight here for all of you. Now, from IMI perspective, taking that challenges, you see already there is a growing number of technologies there, not just for risk management across water, climate, food systems, across all this landscape, technologies can play a big role. But not just we believe only in technology, you also need to have ground-based information. You also need to have input from partners. You need to have institutions, not just single institution, but multi-institutional coordination and taking on board the role of communities as well. As you start integrating this knowledge and information, you might then talk about collective risk management, looking at sustainable economic growth, health of the ecosystems. That's where the forest, hydrology, ecosystems, everything comes into the picture. And then we talk about not just keeping all those challenges, but also the sustainable agriculture, because often we talk about excessive use of fertilizer, management practices are not sustainable. You need to also look at smart farming as well. So I think in all the way, you can look at integrated solutions are quite important, the kind of topic we are highlighting here. Now, the other technology I just also want to highlight here, this is a product that is developed by Google, where they are producing a India flood product where Ministry of Water Resources and other national partners are involved here. What you see here is today you are not talking about a community should run a flood model. A community can get a flood alert if they have a smartphone, or the smartphone communities can able to alert through number of other mechanisms the likely flood events. So the AI-based models can help us to tell likely flood event where the scenarios are going to come, not just today, but for the next couple of days. So once that alert is known, then agencies like space agencies like ISRO or any other space agencies could activate a disaster response strategy to know where the risk has happened or where the hazard has happened. And then in the long run, those areas need to be come up with a better financial resilience instruments. It could be insurance, it could be number of other financial instruments one could able to roll out in those regions. So again, I just want to bring the role of technology here very well. And again, not just limiting ourselves to weather forecast, but also translating that across the phases of disaster risk management. Now, as we talk about disaster, we always need to keep in mind these three terms: hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. I hope you are all familiar. If not, read number of reports that are available in UN DRR website. So if you talk about hazard, it's to know the type of hazard is going to happen in your region. And exposure is the kind of population or the kind of land use that are expected to get exposed on year by year basis. And the vulnerable people, it's not just about maybe a vulnerable population, whether it could be a low or high, depending on that the risk levels are going to vary. If I have a flood written of a 1 in 100 year or 1 in 20-year flood event, it may not be that entire population will be affected. There will be a specific type of population living near to the river or living near to the paddy field. They might be the first impactor who would get affected by this. Maybe the societies which are in high-rise building, they may not be affected because they are living in a full structured platform in which they may not get completely flooded. So once you have this free information, then you can talk about how do you reduce the risk. That's through adaptation. Come up with a lot of solutions in whether it is a nature-based solution or building a better early warning system and providing a social protection system. There are a lot of topics are there. Many agencies are working. And last but not least, as we talk about adaptation, we also look at the mega floods that are expected to happen, or many other big disasters will happen. So I would also look at more structural problems as well. So you could come up with some reservoirs, you could come up with some floodgates so that you can timely release it. Often we have seen in some of the countries where timely release of reservoir never happens. So the standard operating procedures are also need to be guided. So that's where again the capacity development is very important. Now I'm moving now into more into a specific product like information on drought, where vulnerability to rural sectors are critically important here. And here we are talking about technology again, informations like drought monitoring system. The one IMI is having SADMS, South Asia Drought Monitoring System. Here, what it means for us is what technology can really provide. So you could get a series of knowledge information, whether through Met Department, whether through satellite data. You will get all those information. What are we going to do with that? So you need to work with relevant institutions. It could be agriculture, it could be universities, it could be farmer, and then tailor that information to provide actionable data so that the farmers can make timely decisions. Not only farmer, but also the extension agencies like KVK in the farm schools, etc., could look at this information, what they are supposed to do with those societies. So this is more to looking at how the farming sectors can build resilience. So knowledge informations are very critical to highlight here. So what we do here is it's not just providing some synaptic maps or statistics. We also need to reach out to those societies. It could be a farmer in this case where we need to educate them the kind of risk that is going to happen, what they are supposed to do in terms of the agronomic practices, in terms of scheduling the irrigation water supply, or it could be areas where you could come up with the better crops using a drought tolerant seeds, or it could be areas where you could rotate your crops from rice crop to other maize or millet, anything, knowing that the water deficit is going to be increasingly going to happen in those societies. And again, I think for societies to respond to future risks, we also need a better decision platform. So we need to also document those management practices. So integrated knowledge information with decision support is again very ideal information that we need to look at. So moving further on that, I just want to move some of our example also to Africa, not just highlighting our capabilities to South Asia. Here is a product we are talking about in areas where if you look continent like Africa, you see both problems of floods and drought. So being a large continent where you see blue refers to wet areas, red refers to dry areas, it could be a drought or it could be a water deficit areas. So as you see this region between the two contrasting years, we have been monitoring this on a regular basis to the purposes for providing a better regional and continental product for well-informed decision making for number of users, but also look at tailoring those products. For example, we are looking at a specific moisture area, excess moisture area. We have done a mapping in 2012 where we looked at there is a massive disaster is happening there. So when you have a real-time monitoring system, you could timely provide to those national members saying that these are the likely areas you are going to have flooding. So when this information is provided and a couple of days later you see a flooding is happening, or an area which is completely drought here or a deficit area, we can also provide a number of knowledge products that can explain a detailed resolution of where the likely droughts are expanding or moving from region to region. So because unlike floods and drought is a very complex to define. There are major types of drought, whether it's a meteorological drought, hydrological drought, or agriculture drought, and it's a slow process. Sometimes after the drought receding, it might take years to recover. So that's a kind of a challenge, unlike the flood events, right? So after you have such information, this is what I want to highlight. You can zoom in to a resolution where fine scale data could be monitored. And this is the kind of a data where the government needs it, because they don't want to look at a very granular information. They would like to look at a fine scale data, not just knowing the hazard. Then you could combine that with your exposure, your drought risk, and then this is the final information. Because if you compare this data with this data, maybe the hazard was low, but when it looks to the exposure levels are quite high, that's why the risk level is also quite high. So you need to combine this. Maybe the hazard you see, and not much people exist in those regions. Maybe they are not practicing the crop this season. So you need to not just limit yourself to quantify the hazard, but also relate with your exposure and vulnerability information to define the risk levels. Now, moving from there, we also need to look at not highlighting knowing the hazard, but also look at what's the likely production risk will happen in those areas. Why this is so important is that if you look at the productions of a country like Ethiopia, we are talking about 4,000, it's like close to 4 million hectare of the area is being produced for wheat area. But then if you compare that with the 2016 being the challenging year for them, and then in a non-drought year, we are significantly seeing 5.5 million hectare. So if such a reduction is there, it will directly impact those communities. So it could be a severe acute food shortages, it could be a malnutrition issues. Number of things will emerge from these problems because lack of food availability to those societies. So this is where I would limit how geospatial data monitoring early warning information can play a big role when it comes to not knowing the hazard, but also look at more analytical solution to manage and quantify those risks. Now, from there, I just want to take it to the next two milestones of our work on investing in financial resilience and to climate shock. This is very important to look at. While I'm talking about, we can talk about investment in climate, or you see a lot of adaptation fund. Government of India is investing a lot of watershed program. There are many countries are taking climate resilience project in recent years. So look at this kind of disaster statistics, like event like floods, where you are seeing uninsured losses is the blue line. I mean, dark blue is the insured losses, and the red one is the uninsured losses. So when you compare from this graph, there is a huge protection gap. So we would expect this blue line should also be closer to the red line. This means that any disaster need to be insured. Often what happens, this doesn't happen in developing countries. So farmers who produce the crop, he or she will think that there may not, the risk will not come, it may not be a major disaster, so let me not do any insurance, because they would like to save those money for crop management practices. It could be buying a fertilizer, it could be buying a pesticide, it could be a labor cost. But what will happen if a big flood or a drought has happened? Their crop, whatever they invested, is completely wiped out. So this is where we need to also look at transferring the risk, whatever the risk you would like to insure, whether it could be a 2% of your total input cost, it could be a 10% of your input cost, flooding that is expected to come. So when the flooding comes, his shop is completely wiped out. So that also brings the economic resilience need to be looked at. So that's what I would highlight this particular slide here. Now, moving from there, I just want to highlight, because this is more on financial resilience. Globally, if you look like developed countries like US or Europe, you see that high insured density we can see in countries like Europe or US. It means that the not only the infrastructure but also the life insurance, There could be a flood insurance for buildings, number of products in which they are able to manage their climate shocks. But when you come to countries like Africa or South Asia, you see that already countries are inadequately insured. There are places we are talking about less than 10 US dollar. And in some countries, we do not have data, or they would have not rolled out such product. That could be also a possibility. So this is the kind of state of the problems we are seeing here. From the data produced by Munich Re. Maybe the situation should have been updated. This is a scenario that was produced in 2014, but I don't think there will be a major change into this. Now from there, why it is really a problem between the developed countries and the developing countries. So when you look at problems like India or any part of the developing region, this is a picture from, of course, from India, where you see that there is a poor insurance penetration. The reasons are, as I listed here, lack of data. So lack of data is very important, because if an insurance company, whether it could be a Munich Re or Swiss Re, they would like to build a risk model, they may not have a quality data. It could be a household information, it could be the structural information, the quality of the building, and we also need to quantify the levels of vulnerability as well. Because as I said in my previous talk, you need to quantify the hazard, you need to know your exposure, you need to know the levels of vulnerability. So in a picture like this, we know the hazard is reaching up to this building, which you are seeing on the left side of the river. And you also know the exposure, how much of buildings are going to get affected. Part of the buildings are already submerged here, and the levels of vulnerability. So when a high-rise building on the western part compared to the buildings which are closer to the river, their vulnerability is much higher. So when you combine this in the risk modeling, you would be able to know what is the expected insurance premium that are expected to come for this particular building. But now who will really pay for those premium? Whether it should be a policies that should come, any buildings that are going to be developed, by default there should be an insurance for that, or the government need to support that. So we need to look at a risk financing instrument, not just from the public government, but also from the public as well. So otherwise, each year you might see a big flooding, no one is going to compensate those losses. That's a highlight of this particular picture. And I just want to highlight also, this is not a very easy job. So it needs to be a very detailed damage assessment. Sometimes it takes really ages to cover such a massive risk modeling exercise, and often there is a degree of uncertainties in those results as well. So this is where parametric insurance becomes more handy. Parametric insurance means you use rainfall input, you could use a weather, any weather, humidity, you could also use temperature or soil moisture. You could use any form of ground-based measurement. It could be a weather station, or you could also use a satellite-based instrument. And once you have these instruments, you could then develop a parametric product. So what does it means is, if you have a constructed historical insurance product using those data, you could then automatically trigger through a index. That's why we call index-based insurance. So if you have a threshold that breaches for a given year or a given day, the farmers or the societies living in those regions will get a compensation by default, without the need for any field level investigation or a massive damage assessment to be done at the ground level. So we have tested such product, and we have rolled out in a few countries already. And this is a product summary in brief. So we have been doing this trial in few countries, as I said, India and Bangladesh. We have rolled out over 7,000 household. In fact, these results are getting updated. We have given a payout of over 150,000 US dollar, and we are scaling with various partners, because this takes a lot of time and efforts to build the sustainability of such solution. But I would like to say there are huge opportunities here because of access to open source data. And again, we are looking at communities who are vulnerable, disadvantaged societies, who could also be part of those systems, because most of the communities who live in those regions may not have any insurance solution, but they might be practicing taking a lending loans from MFI or etc. So digital data, innovative solutions are critical when it comes to risk transfer mechanism like index-based flood insurance. Now, with that, I just want to end with reaching to the last 2 points of my slide is on bringing the risk aspect from the health sector. So this is it's a very challenging area and not much work has been done. In a moment, we are in a pandemic of corona situation here. This is a very classical example, not just natural disasters like floods and drought. The situation is very similar to the human disasters like corona here, COVID situation here. So what I'm trying to present in the next two slides is to look at what we can do much to those societies which are affected by any form of natural disasters, right? So what it brings is when the risk happens, the natural disaster happens, we talked about hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. So this is where the health risk is coming into that. We can identify which communities are going to be highly vulnerable to health risk as well. It is not just quantifying the type of people. You could also find out which societies will be highly vulnerable to infectious diseases as well, based on the integrated geospatial knowledge. Now, as an example, I just want to run through these three forms of disasters where health risks are fundamentally important. We are talking about hydrometeorological disasters are globally in large numbers reported worldwide. And the statistics that points out that public health consequences from flooding or disease outbreak, it could be a vector-borne diseases, it could be some kind of water quality contamination. People drinking those water can also get some infectious diseases. And usually during the flood time, people will be moved to flood shelters, and the quality of water, there are other problems of chemicals that can also be reached out in the subsurface, because the chemicals goes below the surface of the groundwater, and when the people drink those water, they also get infected by those diseases. That's a hydrometeorological disaster. We do have geophysical disaster, particularly the earthquake we have seen in Nepal, a massive earthquake that has happened. And again, this all becomes into the social distancing. We are talking even in pandemic like COVID, social distancing is very important, because X person might have some disease due to he might have got in wet places for quite some time. He might have picked up certain fever, but when he is getting crowded, sitting in a places where those problems will spread to other people. That's what we are talking about, this pandemic situation. And again, in problems in those areas, which also about access to food and safe water, not just for geophysical disaster, but also for any form of hydrometeorological disaster as well. Because if you don't give food, you might get into other form of diseases as well on a timely response to, and even during the wet period, you might need to provide a hot food as well. That also helps to prevent certain diseases. And the third one is the geomorphological disasters. That's where avalanche, landslides, that's again very common in India when it talks about both this disaster. Recently, early this year, we have got a major avalanche and a flash flood event has been reported. And again, in all those things, you see collectively the health risk is very critical, and we don't have much data is available in public domain. We don't have a robust information in place. So what my thoughts based on that was, um, we can really see already there are plenty of geospatial knowledge products are there. We can look really those information across different phases of the outbreak, and we could effectively monitor the infectious diseases. For example, a picture like a cyclone here, if we know that when likely this cyclone is going to impact, we know which communities, which vulnerable societies will be need to be evacuated, and then you can come with a preparedness, health preparedness strategy. It could be a better drinking water, it could be a better toilet facility, it could be better vaccination for them, preventive measures, it could be providing better food and social distancing, places to live. So you need to look at larger response strategies here. And one of the initial phase I would talk about a picture like this is about advanced seasonal weather forecast data. It could be extended. Even we can help the health responders to provide 1 month in advance what the seasonal outlook for monsoon. Like we are in a monsoon period now. Mumbai recently got a good rain. and we don't know how much people were affected by the monsoon. So if you know what areas you are going to receive extreme rainfall, health guidelines can be developed, like what we are doing now presently for the time like pandemic. And also during the disaster happening in a given location, you could also use near real-time satellite data. It's not just quantifying the risk, but also alerting those health officials where the flooding is happening, where the flood water, usually flooding where it is happening is not a problem. Where the flood is receding, those areas need to be monitored, because communities will be moving back to those areas. They might pick up some diseases. And also it's not just about human, it's also about livestock as well. Do cattle and other animals do get infectious diseases? From there the human also can get affected. So we need to look at comprehensive health response strategies here. And also you could prevent, you could control these diseases well in advance using advanced technologies like big data approaches I mentioned in my beginning of my slide. And I think important, I would say, in the natural disaster, we don't have a robust health information platform and a reporting system. We don't have also the best practices that are available in public domain, what you are supposed to do, how you have to respond, how you can manage. Now we are learning through COVID. I think this might be a great opportunity, learning from these lessons, how these kind of a systemic approach we can develop for other disasters as well. So my key messages from this presentation is that preparedness is very critical. This is where monitoring and early warning is very important, so that you can enhance disaster response strategies to those communities. And unlike, it cannot be a one-man job, it should be an institutional coordination to bring on robust risk governance here and responding to timely to those shocks. And we need to ensure those important and relevant knowledge products. We see there are too many technologies, too many products, but we need to say there are some users who are looking for product, they may not have access to that. So we need to ensure a regular mechanism, like country like US have done a great job to ensure a timely knowledge products available to any part of the user, right? And also make sure that this should be a sustainable. So we need to build capacities among stakeholders and promote innovations to empower those societies. With that, I stop here. Thank you for giving this opportunity.